right, everybody. Welcome to Dice Tower Daily Chat. I'm Tom Vassell, and with us today is our guest, Travis Severance. I have
Hey
to
Tom,
say,
how are you?
I'm doing, I'm doing okay. You know, it's the weekend. Woo. I'm
Whatever
actually a
that
little
means.
disappointed because if things had been very different 2 days ago, I would have been in your store.
Oh yeah, yep.
That was
Gathering of friends. I know. I had the warning come up on my phone too. Um, yeah, that sucks. We were going to do a whole catering thing for a whole bunch of you folks too, so that would have been a great time. Yep.
Yeah, I was pretty excited because, if you don't know, Travis runs Millennium Games, which is uh, one of the largest game stores in America, I believe.
Yeah. We're right around 12,000 square feet. So yeah, it's a substantial size store for our industry for sure.
So, folks, I thought bringing on a game store owner, and Travis is definitely versed in the industry. He's involved in lots of the retail boards. I'm consistently reading his Facebook posts, talking about this stuff, and I thought this would be a good way for us to talk to him about running a hobby store, especially running a hobby store during this time. But so I'm curious. I since I haven't been to the store and I likely won't be there for a year now. What kind of, you know, obviously there's games, but what kind of products do you sell?
So we're a full line retail store, and what I mean by that is we carry all of the categories that you see in a traditional hobby store. So we have card games, board games, miniature games, role-playing games, that kind of stuff. And then we kind of branch out a little bit as well. We've got some graphic novels that we sell. We sell disc golf. We just recently got our first Lego order in. We sell puzzles. So there's a pretty wide range of items that we do. We have a pretty sizable used board game section too, so that's kind of a constantly changing reason for people to come in and check out the store and different things like that. And you know, up until recently, we hosted events every day of the week as well. We can house about 180 card players in our play space, and then we've got a private gaming room as well that we do some events in as well.
Is there something that people might be surprised that you do have that sells well?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, we have a pretty significant section of disc golf stuff, and I think a lot of times when people walk into a game store that's focused on gaming and stuff, they aren't typically used to seeing 4,000 to 5,000 different disc golf discs to buy. That's not something that you would see at a normal game store. We have a pretty significant section of role-playing books too. A lot of times when you go into game stores, it's either more of a Magic focused store or it's more of a board game focused store. And we really put a lot of effort into making sure that we have not only the popular role-playing games, but we carry a pretty wide swath of indie role-playing games as well. The idea is to sort of make sure that we've got something for anybody that's coming in to take a look at something, a bunch of adjacent stuff as well.
So a question I've always wondered about is, I understand the draw of Magic the Gathering and the constant income that brings into stores, and board games are in and out. I know that, how they work, but I've always been curious about role-playing games because to me, a role-playing game, you buy a few books and then you're set. How does role-playing consistently bring in income?
So role-playing buyers are the same sort of buyers that you have for each different subcategory of customer in a game store. So with board games, you got a whole bunch of them behind you. If you walk into a board game store and it happens to be your lunch break or something like that, you're going to look around and maybe you end up picking up a $15 or $20 card game that you weren't expecting to buy. A lot of indie role-playing systems, the entire role-playing system is in a small paperback book that's maybe 30 pages or so, and it's an entire rule set with a setting and stuff that you can play that game. That's the same price range. It's around $15 to $20. Now, a role-playing customer, they may never play that system ever. They might just read about it and check out the system and then decide, you know what, that was a good read, but it's nothing that I ever want to implement for my group. A lot of times, the perception is you're going to get into D&D, so you've got to buy a player's handbook, and you've got to buy a monster manual, and you've got to buy a GM guide, and you've got to set up this group and get dice, and then there's all these different books and adventures and so on and so forth. There are, a couple of hundred different independent role-playing systems that we sell that are just literally one book, and the only one player has to buy it. So it's $20, it's an entire adventure and a setting and that, ready to go, and you're done. So some of them you don't even need dice with. It's a diceless system completely. So they're just like board games where there's various different price levels, role-playing games have the same thing. So role-playing shoppers shop in the same way. So whether they just come in and they want to check out a new book, they grab some dice or they grab some sort of other accessory, whether it's a plastic miniature or something like that. There's a whole range of different smaller items that they could purchase, and then there's those that are dedicated to the consistent lines that we see all the time, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or Shadowrun or Pathfinder or any of those other things too, where there's just gobs and gobs and gobs of information out there that you can play with.
Well, Dean asked a good question. I didn't mention this. Where is this game store?
Oh, so we're in Rochester, New York, in Henrietta, which is one of the little suburbs. There's a small airport over by us, and I've been running the store for 18 years now. The store has been in the same parking lot for, I think we're going on maybe 35 years as a game store in that area. So it's a pretty substantial, known kind of landmark in the area there for sure.
Well, Kabuki Kid wants to know, what are some of your favorite games?
Oh gosh. So games are kind of like music for me. It depends on the mood that I'm in and depends on the group of people that I'm hanging out with. It really depends on what I'm looking to get out of a night. I can have a good time with, I can sit back and I can play just one and enjoy myself playing a game like that or something like Codenames. I like something that's a little bit more granular but with some social deduction in it too. I like it when you're trying to kind of get through. I enjoy longer games like a Battlestar Galactica or something like that, but then there's times when I'm in other groups too where I can sit down and I can play Agricola and I really enjoy that game experience too. So it really depends on what I'm in the mood for. I come from a family of gamers and I have a game store now, so when I get together with my relatives, I end up being the person that goes through and does a lot of the rules, and the skill level of my relatives are varied as well. So I have certain games that I play with some groups and certain games that I play with another group, and 9 times out of 10 it goes, I'll start with the rules discussion, and then they'll say, we just want to play, and I'll get into the game, and then they'll say, well, what about that rule? Wait a minute, you guys fast forwarded me through that rules discussion, so I'm going to have to go back now. Do you want me to teach you the rules, or do you want to just get into the gameplay? So it's this constant tug of war that I just know is going to happen every time, so I'm okay with that. So I guess to answer the question, it's really dependent on the group of players that I'm playing with. I've played some of my favorite games I've had some times when I played games with players that I thought were going to really enjoy a game and they just didn't enjoy it, and then I've had other times when I was surprised by a game just based on the group. So a lot of times I try to pick whatever game's going to suit that group the best for me to have the most fun with, typically.
Nate is asking about volume. His question, he says, what are your high profit margin items? I can't imagine the volume necessary to support all the overhead and inventory. And I've always been curious about that myself, because it seems to me very difficult to figure out. You only have so much space, and how do you determine what to carry? Sure.
So owning a game store is basically the best resource management game that I've ever played. I've got a certain amount of capital. I've got a certain amount of area control that I can use. I can set it up, so it sort of works a little bit like Vegas Showdown or Princes of Florence on how I want to determine where I'm gonna set my things up. As far as volume goes, I bought the store with my business partner 12 years ago, and the store was at one place. And right now, in 12 years, we've increased our gross sales by 6.5%, or 6.5 times what the store was when I bought it. So we do that because there's an expansion in the industry in general in terms of gaming. So every time there's a spike in something, we try to capture as much of that audience as we possibly can. So when Dungeons & Dragons got really big, we not only leaned into Dungeons & Dragons and got that market, but we also got all the things on the periphery too. Because when something gets hot or when something's exciting, the things on the outsides of it also get strong as well. So when Magic's doing really well, Pokemon gets good, and so does Yu-Gi-Oh!, and so does a bunch of other indie card games that kind of come out on the side. And the same thing happens in all the different categories. So it's one of those things where we take a look at our fixed costs and stuff, and we get an idea of gross sales numbers and what we need to make on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis based on our fixed expenses and our expected profits, and we kind of just grind it all down by that. I mean, we can make it so that I know how much I need to make within a square foot of the store in order to make the model work. But as far as what I carry and how we do our ordering and what we do with our selling, it's like playing the hot hand. You know, if board games are doing really well, then that's where all our buying power is going. I don't try to go against the current unless it's something where there are times when my peers in retail will decide that a product isn't worth their time, whether that's Star Wars Destiny or Keyforge or any number of other things that is difficult or challenging for them to kind of wrap their heads around. And if there's opportunity there, or there's confusion there in the market or something like that, that creates opportunity for buying. So when Keyforge came out, I think we were one of the highest initial orderers of that game. And obviously we did really, really, really well with that. And the same thing kind of happened with Star Wars Destiny. So it comes down to being able to evaluate the games, understanding the consumer market as best you can, and then being able to have the finance behind you to lean into something that you think is going to be successful for and not be scared of the risk to do so. And if you're in a cash positive position, you can do that. If you're not, then it's a little bit harder.
With Star Wars Destiny and Keyforge, I noticed that they were both extremely popular, and due to various factors, they kind of slowed down some. In fact, Star Wars Destiny's finished,
Yep.
And we'll see where Keyforge goes. But have you seen something in the past 5 years or so that doesn't show this sign of abating, that is still fairly strong? Other than Magic.
So it's interesting, right? So there's pillars in the game industry that we kind of measure everything by, right? And so in each of those categories will tell you that you've got to essentially, I call them primes because there's no better word for me to use for that. So the prime in miniatures is the measuring stick for that is Warhammer 40K. For role playing, it's Dungeons and Dragons. For card games, it's Magic. And then for board games, for the longest period of time, the closest that I could get to a prime was how many copies of Catan was I selling in a year. That would give me an idea of what the baseline new customer market for that looks like. And to understand that, I kind of push out a little bit wider because you couldn't really use Catan as a barometer. I'd have to use Catan, and I'd have to use Ticket to Ride, and I'd have to use a couple of other games to kind of figure out what that looks like in terms of growth or potential new customers.
Maybe we need a Fortune 500 for games.
Yeah, no kidding. So there's some of that there. You can see a little bit of that from time to time. It's interesting to watch, the top, if I look at my top 50 titles over the last 12 years, 25 of those titles year in and year out have been the same, and the other 25 have been new ones that have swapped in. Now, some of those have changed. I've seen those little bar graphs on the top selling albums or whatever. It would be interesting to see that with regard to board game sales and how one overtook the other and so on and so forth, because I think that would give you a real idea of where things were. But every time somebody's like, well, the bubble's going to burst, the bubble's going to burst, the bubble's going to burst, it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm going to sell 3 digits of Catan this year. I'm going to sell 3 digits of Ticket to Ride. I'm going to sell this many Carcassonne. I'm going to sell this many. So if I'm still continuing to sell all those core level games, despite the fact that, honestly, if we take a look at it with an educated eye and we compare those games to other games in that space, they're not the best priced. They're not the most robust experience. They're not the best production. And yet they still continue to sell. So there still tends to be some kind of there's some kind of momentum behind those titles that make people continue to come and buy them. And for the most part, it's got to be new players coming into the world. So when I look at any of those things, I don't think Magic's the best card game ever. I don't think D&D is the best role-playing game ever. And I don't think Warhammer 40K are the best miniatures game ever. They just happen to be first to market in most cases. And then they kind of exploded from there. But, when I make those type of decisions, I usually base everything on what the momentum is for those certain things. Now, the interesting thing with these times are, with the exception of maybe board games, the other 3 things are various event-centric. So what the landscape looks like when we're kind of through this Corona thing is probably going to be a lot different for stores with play spaces and stuff, I would imagine.
Yeah, we'll find out as time goes by. Dean says he's only been to the 2 local game stores near him. What do people first notice when they walk into your store?
It's pretty... If you've only gone to more normal-sized game stores, it's sort of like the feeling of if you've only shopped at your local grocery store and you walk into like something the scale of like a Walmart or a Costco, it sort of has that much of an expansion to it, right? Most game stores in the country, I think, are around 2,200 square feet. So we're about 5 times that number. So if you've been to other game stores, it's sort of a calming thing where you look at it and you're like, wow, there's an immense amount of stuff. I can't imagine them not having something that I'm looking for. Now, if you're somebody that's brand new, that's never been exposed to any kind of game stores or anything like that, it's certainly overwhelming because it's just vast. It's a large, well lit, well merchandised store with a whole ton of things, and if you don't have some direction or some idea where you're going, it can be a little bit overwhelming for sure.
Rye says, how do you decide what to demo in this store?
So we have 11 demo tables set up in our store, and we rotate those demo tables monthly. And what goes on those tables, there's a variety of what we think are hot games that are new to the market that have come in the last 30 days. They'll get put out there. Sometimes we vary based on price point, the time of the year, what we expect the consumer to look like. Like our demo tables in November and December look very different than they do the rest of the year because we think that the people that are coming in aren't going to be as ingrained a gamer as they would be during the normal course of the year. So we try to pick a variety of price points, a variety of player levels, a variety of different game experiences. Like we don't want to put, as tempting as it was last year, we didn't want to put 11 roll and writes on the table. It would have been overwhelming, and it would have if you love roll and writes, great, we've got them all on the table here for you. Well, maybe 1/3 of them from last year or whatever. But if you don't like roll and writes, then sorry, we don't have anything for you. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Occasionally, I just hand it to my employees too, and I just say, hey guys, what do you guys want to put out there? So everybody will put one. They'll get a greatest hit out there, and they'll demo those games, and then we'll see how the sales are at the end of the month, and then we just switch them up as best we can.
So a question I have here, this is always interesting to me how this works out. A lot of game stores have diehard customers, the people who come in consistently. They're there, some of them every day, and there's the occasional customer who is kind of a pain to other people for a variety of reasons. Maybe they don't use good hygiene. Maybe they're just kind of an ornery jerk. They're the overly helpful person when someone's shopping. How do you deal with those kind of people, knowing that sometimes maybe this is their thing in life, right?
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I learned really, really early on, how important that was, and how serious I had to take that part of the responsibilities and my duties as somebody that was at the time just a store manager, and now as a store owner. Given that I'm providing them the space that is exactly what you said. It's their third place. It's not work, it's not home, it's where they get to go. A lot of times I think people have knee-jerk reactions of, well, you got to remove that person. You have to remove, there's no way you can have that in your environment. They're rarely disruptive, and so on and so forth. And what I've found over the course of the years are, honestly, just a conversation works really, really well. And in each different scenario that you kind of put out there, there's a different conversation that needs to be had. I mean, I can remember having a younger teenage guy at one of my miniatures tournaments a couple of weeks ago. It was a hygiene issue, and I just pulled him off to the side and I said, we've got small hygiene kits kind of in the back, and we don't make a big deal out of it, but there's, I gave him a little tiny, like a half-size speed stick travel thing, and I said, look, I don't care what you do outside of here, but inside of here, there's an expectation of what we have as far as hygiene goes and the rest of the players in here and stuff. And I'm positive that you don't want to be known as the person that doesn't smell good here, right? And they nodded their head. But a lot of times, I don't put any kind of prejudice or any preconceived idea on what somebody's coming from or where they're coming from. So, maybe they don't have somebody at home to tell them, by the way, this is something that you need to do, or they're just, finally they've gotten old enough now where they are sweating or something like that. So my responsibility a little bit is some stewardship when it comes to that kind of thing. And, I've had people break down crying because they had no idea, and it wasn't anything that they knew, because that just wasn't what they knew to do. So it certainly depends on the situation. The overly helpful customer, that's, our managers pull those people aside all the time and explain to them the difference between the employee-customer relationship and stuff like that, and how we appreciate the fact that you're supportive of the store and things like that. But when a customer comes in, they're looking for the opinion of the employee rather than the customer, unless they ask you specifically. So it can just be a real quick, direct, easy conversation to have, and we kind of just go about doing what we're doing. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be. A lot more. It used to be something we dealt with a lot. Our diversity of customer in the last 6 or 7 years, that gaming in general has gotten so wide at this point that the variety of customer that I have now is massive. So it doesn't feel as much like, not to say that our events still aren't packed with mostly men, depending on what the event is. We do have definitely events where there's more women customers that are in playing in the events than there are guys. It just happens from time to time.
Sure.
But we don't have as many problem customers as what we used to have, I think.
Dave wants to know, is open play space required nowadays for a brick and mortar friendly local game store to thrive or even survive? Of course, this could all change, obviously, in the coming weeks. But until now,
we're going to see. Is it required? No, but I wouldn't want to not do it, because the acronym is UVP, and it's unique value proposition. So what is it that, as a brick and mortar store, what can I offer a consumer that other places and online avenues can't? So if I'm going to get into a business where a customer can literally walk around my store and they can pick up any item on my shelf, they can find it for 30% off, and they can click a button and have it to their house in 2 days, how do I try to compete in that kind of a market, in that kind of environment? Having a play space and having events and having different meetup groups and demo tables and different things like that gives me an opportunity to be able to do that. With customers as educated as they are and with as much information as they have, curation is a big part of what we do too, making sure that the games that we have on our shelf are good games that people want to play, that are quality games, and we have a level of expertise when it comes to those games. But in general, it gives us the opportunity to use recruitment. So bring in a friend, we'll walk you through a game. We Thursday nights we used to do something called Play Something New, and it was literally a moderated play experience for whatever board game we picked for that week. We had a person up there that did instruction and stuff, and there was a slight discount attached to it if you came and you played, but everybody had to pay $10 to come in. They got $10 in store credit. They could use that on whatever they wanted. And then there was a game of the day. And then after the game of the day was played and taught, then they could do some open gaming at the end for the last hour or so. I think without play space, you leave yourself with just games on a shelf, and I don't know how compelling games on a shelf is to just your average shopper. When they come in, if you've got something different or you've got a level of expertise, they could find some value in that. But it's like, aside from instant gratification, it's just a part of the game industry where you're not allowing yourself some space to be able to have effect on your community, I think, without having that.
Well, let me follow up on that then. What about, how important is it to have, I'm not talking about a cafe or restaurant, but like a wide array of snacks/drinks. Is that something that a game store should have? Is it better not to have it?
So a little bit earlier, you were talking about higher margin items. Like the most exciting sale that I can make in the store is a bottle of water. I make more margin off a bottle of water sale in my store than any game or any dice or anything else that we sell. So I think being able to have snacks and drinks and different beverage options and things like that go with your play space just makes sense from a financial standpoint. It's sort of like a casino. Casinos are built kind of as labyrinths and stuff like that with as many different opportunities, and they try to make it as hard as they can for people to get out of them, essentially.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, if I've got a customer that comes in my store, I want to try to make sure that I can keep them happy that entire time, because just business tells me the longer they're there, the more likely they are to spend money in my store, in most cases. So if I don't provide them with some food or some snack options when they walk out the store, even if they're part of an event and they go to a restaurant or something like that to pick something up, or a gas station, there's an opportunity that they're just not coming back that night, or they don't make a purchase that night, or they get a phone call, or they have to do this or that or the other thing. So having those things available to a customer during the times when they're playing just makes sense from a business standpoint, and they're not difficult or challenging things to do. You don't have to have a huge, La Boulange setup like Starbucks has or anything like that. A couple of racks, a nice cooler. Most of the beverage companies will supply you a cooler if you're going to carry their products and stuff, and then kind of take it from there. So yeah, I think it's pretty important for what we do.
All right, turning 90 degrees here. Spencer wants to know, have you played Dominion? And if so, what's your favorite expansion?
So Dominion's not my favorite deck builder. So the first time I played Dominion, I got annoyed with Dominion in general because I didn't like the way that the library looked. So I played the game where I only bought coins and I only bought victory cards, and I ended up winning. So Dominion had a very so I buy this to buy extra buys, to have extra things to spend, to do extra stuff, and I just shuffle and draw and do this thing, and like everybody else at the rest of the table is just looking at me as I'm shuffling my cards and I'm playing my things. That said, I have played some of the other expansions. I think I like Intrigue a lot, and then the other one that I liked was the purple one. The one, is Alchemy. It the spells and Alchemy. Alchemy is the other one that I enjoyed. I think there's better deck builders out there. Dominion's not my favorite, but Dominion was one of those games, though, that when I was talking about the games that I kind of use as a litmus, Dominion sales is one of those things that I take a look at because it kind of launched the deck builder category in general, and that's a really big, important category in my store as far as game types go. So I'm happy to have Dominion, and we carry all of the expansions and all of the core as well as the upgrade kits and stuff like that. But it's not my personal favorite, I would say.
All right, what's the best part of owning a game store?
The best part about owning a game store, without a doubt, is that I get to sell escape. So I sell fun all day long. So the crappiest part about being closed down during this whole thing is there isn't a time when I think I could help the community more than right now.
Yeah, I know.
State and local government says I can't help you during this period of time. So it really stinks for me because owning a game store is nice because if the economy is going really well, people have a ton of extra money, so they use that extra money on games. Game stores in general do really well in a recession too, because when people are having hard times, they don't want to necessarily deal with the hard times as well. So if they have some discretionary funds, they're going to try to spend that on entertainment and stuff like that. And unlike movies or baseball games or things like that are enjoyable, at the end of buying a game, you've got that experience that you can continue to have over and over and over again. So, being able to I worked in a wide range of different industries before this, and being able to have, honest to goodness customer interactions that say, I had fun with this, you'll be able to take this home and have fun with your family. There's not a better industry I can be in. I mean, I have customers that come in all the time and say, it's the best 2 to 3 hours a week I get with my family. Thank you for being the store that provides that. They get to get their entire family around the dinner table. They clear the bills off to one side and they put the game out, and then they have that social interaction. And I guess it's a little touchy-feely thing like that when you break it down that way. But I can't sell anything. There's nothing that I could sell in the world better to me than being able to do that. So it's also part of the reason why, with kind of the way the world is right now, we're going to evolve and we'll do some more online selling and stuff like that. But I kind of stubbornly pushed against doing a lot of online sales because I didn't want to sell to a mailbox. I wanted to sell to a human. I thought those human interactions were super, super important. Those analog interactions were really, really critical for us. And I wanted to sell to my local customer and be able to push that and expand that in my area. So that's definitely the reason why owning a game store is awesome.
Dean wants to know if you carry a lot of expansions. He says a game store near him brings in very few expansions and basically lets people order those instead of putting them on the shelf.
So it depends on the game, and it depends on It depends on how old the expansion is. Now, you can drown yourself in expansions. If I look at I have a sale table in the back that has all games that haven't sold within a certain period of time, and it's 40% off. And I bet if I went back there, the majority of those games are expansions. What happens is a core game comes out, and the first expansion that comes out, a good expansion will sell maybe 20% of what you sold in that core in the first, year of its existence. Every single expansion past that goes down exponentially more. And it doesn't matter if the game is, following some sort of an adventure path to it or not. Like if it's plug and play, or if it's like Time Stories, you don't have to buy Time Stories in any specific order, but the 9th or 10th Time Stories expansion doesn't sell as good as the first or the second one. Carcassone's the same way, and Catan is the same way, and any of the expandable games are like that. So if I had a smaller...
Is it this way with living card games too?
So it depends on the living card game. So living card games that are the cooperative ones, so Arkham Horror, Lord of the Rings, and the new Marvel Champions one, the cooperative games, the tail of those are much, much longer because there's no meta. You're not keeping up with what's going on or what the hot deck is. You're kind of just buying in order episodically. So at the end of the day, the second expansion has definitely sold more than, I don't know what they're up to with Lord of the Rings, 75th or 76th. But the cooperative games tend to stay more relevant for longer because you're having more of a casual experience versus the LCGs that are, Game of Thrones and stuff like that. Part of the draw initially with LCGs versus a collectible card game model is, well, when I buy in, I've just got to buy the core, and then every single month I kind of buy the subscription model and I spend $15. Well, that works until you get to about month 16. So at month 16, when somebody's introduced to that game and they come in and they look at the LCG model and they say, I want to get into Game of Thrones. Well, you need one card from this chapter pack, and you need one card from this chapter pack, and you need one card from this chapter pack. Each one of those is $15. So you're taking the other 57 cards in that pack and you're pushing them off to the side. You just need this. So now your cost for your LCG game has gotten to be the point where it's the same cost for a standard Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon deck, and it's like the vibrance of the community for those games is significantly higher than what you'll see in an LCG model. So the cooperative LCGs, they stay around, they sell for longer periods of time, and people still come in because it is really a card game set up sort of in an episodic board game model where you're not changing your meta, you're not adjusting your decks, you're not doing this or you're not doing the other thing. That's not to say that you're not building with the new cards, but there isn't an active tournament component that's live 24/7 with the cooperative stuff. You're just kind of adventuring through.
That's why I think maybe the Marvel one has the longest legs of all, because if someone comes in, you can say, who's your favorite superhero?
100%.
You just buy that pack. You don't have to worry about, is it number 4, is it number 7? It doesn't matter.
Yep, you're just going to buy Captain America, and you're going to have your Captain America deck. Now, you might need different cards from other things, but at least you, just like you said, I can play Captain America. I don't have to buy the rest of the stuff if I don't want to. Now, if you get ingrained into the game and you figure you want to play and you want to build and you want to expand, then that's great. But you don't have to do that. And I think the Marvel Champions game is a lot of years of understanding that model and being able to make some different decisions with regard to how they want to sell that game. And you're kind of seeing all the greatest hits from all the lessons they learned on all the other games before. And if you see while you're playing the game, there's different touch points of the different games that they've kind of built into that, and the expandable model that they're using is very, very different than what they've done before. So I would agree with you. Aside from the fact that it's a super, super strong license and more people are familiar with that than the other ones, I would agree that the Marvel Champions has good legs.
So Kabuki Kid asked about Kickstarter games, and so I thought I'd touch on that a bit. A lot of Kickstarters nowadays have retail pledges.
Yep.
To do those. How often do you do that, and how do you decide which ones?
So I think last year we pledged about 110 different Kickstarter games as a store. How we decide them is sort of the same process that we go into buying any other game. Actually, for me as a retailer, it's a lot safer for me to be able to buy a Kickstarter game than it is to buy just a regular game that comes through traditional, publisher distribution model, because the Kickstarter will tell me what the potential is for the market for that game. Now, occasionally you'll have some people that'll say, well, look at this game, it just sold every copy that it could have possibly ever sold. And it's like, if I talk to those Kickstarter companies that have been really successful with, doing multiple Kickstarters and stuff like that, the numbers that they sell beyond that Kickstarter are 8, 10, 12, 15, 25, 30 times what they sold for copies in their initial Kickstarter. So if I think that the Kickstarter market is the entirety of the market, I've already lost footing anyway. So typically I can take that, if there's 3,000 game stores in the country, how many would I assume would be able to carry a certain game? And then I take that number and I divide that by the total number of pledges, and I think to myself, how many sales could I possibly have lost, and what would I have normally ordered? So the Kickstarter information is pretty invaluable. As far as how do I decide those, it's the same sort of evaluation process that I go through with any game. I look at the price point, I look at the production, I look at the producer, I look at the actual game itself. Is there a space for it in the market right now? The first thing that I do, though, is I'll just evaluate the margin on the Kickstarter that I'm getting as part of a Kickstarter deal. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're terrible. I think a lot of times now publishers put a Kickstarter retailer pledge in there just because they feel like they need to have one, and it doesn't really financially make any business sense.
Sure.
Early on, most of the publishers didn't have that set up, so 9 times out of 10 I'd be able to just reach out to a publisher directly and say, hey, I'm a retail store, I'd like 12, 24, 36 copies of this game. Would you sell it to me at normal pricing and ship it to me when you ship the Kickstarter out? Absolutely. So most of the time publishers are willing to work with a retailer as long as you're looking to buy a case or more, and then
sure, but how do you deal with the fact that these games, you have to pay for them a year, 18 months before you get them? That's very different than most of distribution.
So it depends on the deal too. So like most of the time with the CMON stuff, I'm pledging $1,400 worth of a Kickstarter buy, and I'm only giving them $100 up front, or I'm only paying them when they ship, or I'm only paying them. The models have changed a little bit based on some of the feedback from that. Some of that comes down to just cash flow management too. So yeah, I've got to pay for it, a year in advance or 18 months in advance, and it ships. But when it comes in, that money was already accounted for in last year's books anyway. So everything that comes in is 100% revenue at this point. There's no loss. And the data that I get from Kickstarter campaigns is so much more valuable than what I get through a traditional publisher distribution model, because I've just kind of got their word or their marketing or what they do in the convention space to kind of get the name out, versus a Kickstarter, which, there's the marketing leverage that Kickstarter has. There's the after Kickstarter. Now, the model can certainly be abusive. There's certainly times when I've seen people do, there's the late, quadruple late slacker backer pledge, and it's 5 days before it's actually in your house. Like, okay, guys, we're being a little abusive when we're going to use the model and stuff, but I don't begrudge anybody that uses Kickstarter. I understand the need for it. I use it effectively. Some of the best games in my store are Kickstarter games, because they're frankly games that other retailers won't touch. So when I go back to the unique value proposition, if I'm carrying games in my store that are great games that nobody else locally or even online are carrying, awesome for me. It's kind of like
right.
an indie record store,
How important, says Dave, is analytics, business intelligence, and forecasting to your business model?
How important is it? So it's important for inventory management, 100%. Knowing when you should get rid of a game, or knowing when you should slow down on ordering certain games. Like when we were talking about the LCG model, there's kind of a roller coaster to ordering for that. When the LCGs get to a certain point, all of a sudden the number that you're selling on a monthly basis is going to continue to descend down. And if you don't figure out what that number is ahead of time, you can find yourself caught with a bunch of extra money out there on stuff that people have just stopped buying. So if you're not paying attention to what your sales momentum is on something and knowing when to kind of pull the plug on it, that's going to hurt you. If you're not clearing out dead inventory, you run the risk of your store just turning into a museum store. And while museums are fun to go and look at, if I'm not generating commerce, I've got opportunity costs going out the door. For every single game that sits on my shelf over a period of time and it doesn't pay my rent, I could have had a different game in that space that could have paid rent. So it's like, if I can sell a box of pencils in that space and I make more money on it than this game, then it's time for that game to move out. So we're pretty aggressive about even with the space that I have, I'm certainly not as aggressive as some of my peers with smaller spaces are with regard to game performance and things like that. But metrics is pretty critical. Our point of sale system is pretty robust. I use that. I spend most of my time doing inventory management and ordering. So metric-based stuff and forecasting. Now, when we talk about forecasting, there's a lot that kind of goes into that. I look at different influencers like yourself and the reviews that you guys put forth when it comes to certain games. I look at if it's been on Kickstarter, what were the comments, what's the product look like, can I get an early copy, is it something that I have a relationship with the publisher with, what's their track record, what's their supply chain look like, what distributor has it, what kind of pricing can I get it on my demo table 2 weeks ahead of time, is it something where I can show my customers it, get some pre-orders done before I actually have to commit to buying anything through distribution and stuff. So metrics and forecasting, and most of the time it's just gut check. There's a couple of times a year when I know I'm going to buy 50 to 100 copies of a game because I just feel in my gut that game's going to sell. Now, I'm pretty good at what I do, so most of the time I don't get stuck with those games, but there's certainly times when I brought in 20 or 30 copies of a game and fast forward 90 days and we've only sold 6 copies. That's a failure on my part for sure.
Yeah. So is it better just to clear them out, or you put them back in the back and wait till they go up in price later on?
So the amount of times that happens is super, super, super rare. Usually the meat grinder of our industry it's like the spokes in the wheel. It's just going to continue to turn. So if I bring a game in and we take a significant buying position on it and I put it on the demo table and I train my employees how to sell the game, and for whatever reason it just doesn't catch on with the consumers, for me to hold and hope that game turns at some point is just wishful thinking for the most part. It's probably time to cut bait and run. So we'll either have it on a monthly sale, or it'll go back to the sale table and it'll slowly go through, or we'll use that for different donations and things like that. We'll find some way to effectively move through that inventory. Because if I'm just hoping that a game's going to sell, hope doesn't work. And then trying to go back and put additional effort into something that was already a failure when it was as hot as it could have possibly been is wishful thinking as well. Like, now I'm dedicating double the resources in hopes of capturing sales that weren't there when they were at the best point they could have been there. So no, that trying to go back and reinvest time and effort into a game or a system or anything, and that goes with anything in the game store. It's probably not worth your effort to go at something a second time.
Question here is shoplifting a problem in game stores?
Probably. We do our best to make sure, so the way that our store is set up, our cash wrap, we've got, maybe 3,000 different sets of dice that we sell, and it's all lined around the outside of our cash wrap, so it's as close to the staff as it can possibly be. All of our paints and stuff are really close by as well. Our miniatures aren't too far, so we've got pretty good sight lines. It is something where we've got 9 noticeable cameras and 4 hidden cameras in the store as far as security goes. But again, security only matters typically after the fact, when you think you got a hunch about somebody that's taken stuff. Loss is certainly something that happens with us. It's pretty minimal. But a lot of times that just comes down to active engagement. How often are your employees getting out on the floor to engage with the customer? A greeting will cut down 30% of most shoplifters because they recognize the fact that they're in the store. So the more of that kind of behavior that you can do, the more you can save yourself a lot of headache down the road.
2 questions here. They're very different, actually. One is,
I lost your... I can't hear you.
Oops. Sorry about that. I bumped the button.
There you go. That's okay.
2 questions here. They're in the same thing here, but they're fairly different. One is, have you ever considered opening a second location? And the other is, have you ever considered opening a game cafe? Those are 2 very different questions.
So, second location, we've gone down that road a bunch of different times. We've thought about doing it, and we've been fortunate enough where we've shown double-digit growth in gross sales every year that I've owned the business with my business partner. So it's sort of one of those things where we keep putting money back into the store. It keeps generating more revenue. We keep hiring more employees. We keep selling more games, and we've got it all under kind of one mothership. Now, as soon as we open another store, there's a whole bunch of unknowns that end up coming into play when it comes to that. There's the, if we do it locally, there's the expectation of what our brand has with regard to size and availability and things like that. So there's a lot of pressure from that. And now we're focusing a bunch of attention into another location that we don't know if it's going to be successful or not. Realistically, if we were going to open a second location, we'd probably open a second and a third in the same year, because when you're managing 2 stores, you might as well be managing 3 stores at that point, and
sure.
What I wouldn't want to do is I wouldn't want to have to put a bunch of assets and resources from the main store that's successful into another store that may or may not be successful. So we've kind of gone down that road. But the idea of setting something up and doing something like that, if our growth slowed or if it staled or if it flatlined, then we'd probably look into leaning into another location and doing something like that. But as long as we're on a continued, a nice trajectory of growth each year, we'll just continue doing it. That tells me that there's more availability in that space. I'm not squeezing the orange as much as I possibly could. When it gets to that point, then I could take a look at it. Cafe model. Cafe model. So cafe models a couple of years ago got super, super hot, and a lot of people talked about doing it. We kind of looked at doing that and went into a whole bunch of research on it, and we found out that something like, 80% of the coffee sold in the world is sold before 7 a.m. And I don't get up much before 9:30. So I would have to find a model where I had somebody that I trusted to be into the store early enough to sell those things. And running the game store and deal with game store reviews are challenging enough, let alone having to have somebody give me a 1-star review based on my panini being burnt or something like that, So not only
the failure rate of restaurants pretty high also.
Oh, failure rate's astronomical. And if I were going to, so there's a model that I have in mind for a cafe that I think would work, and I think it could be super, super effective, and I haven't seen anybody use it. But it's kind of like running a game store when you're just getting started. You have to have a lot of passion for it. Now, as much as I enjoy coffee and juice and lunches and things like that, I don't have a real passion for food in that way where I want to prepare it or make it or source it out or get the ingredients or deal with the health department and all the other stuff that kind of goes along with that. So as interesting as it sounds, and I love coffee margins. I've seen what coffee margins are. I've seen what the margins are in lattes and juices and things like that. Like, they are super, super impressive, but you've got to sell a lot of them in a rapid amount of time and stuff. So I've seen some nice cafes, and I've looked at some different models like that, but it's nothing that we ever got much further than jumping into kind of the dollars and cents of it. And then, like you said, the success rate on most of them isn't great. So yeah, personally, it's nothing that we've gone much further than that.
Next question is, what's your personal collection at home like?
So twice a year, my mom has 2 sisters, and both of her sisters have the same number. All the 3 sisters have the same number of kids in their family, so we get together and we do this cousins weekend about twice a year. And there's a variety of games that we end up playing, but most of the stuff has to be 6 to 8 player. So I've got everything from, we'll either break into groups of 4, we'll play big, massive party games or things like that. So I've got everything from, I've got a beat up, like, first edition copy of Guillotine to, I think my most recent Space Battle Lunchtime is something that Oni Press sent me recently. That's just kind of this little card game based on one of their graphic novels that came in. Azul is another one that we play a lot of. Shadowhunters, as ugly graphically as that game is, it actually can be a lot of fun too. So I would say overall my collection would be best described probably as medium, because I tend to play with gamers that are not gamers, that are not, the full end of, they don't want to necessarily sit down to a long haul. They're not looking at Uwe as their go-to designer most of the time. They're more looking at Vlada, not discounting what he did with Mage Knight and stuff like that, but something that's a little bit more accessible to your casual audience, I guess.
Lee says, your store is based pretty far north. Do you think the climate has added to your store's success? And are there seasons that are busier?
So part of the reason why we brought in disc golf was to try to deal with the summertime issues a little bit. Summertime tends to get a little bit slower because people are outside, and living in a climate where this year we got 89 inches of snow, people tend to be indoors a little bit more. Now that said, I think there's gamers everywhere. I think the success of my store more has to do with the fact that it's been around for as long as it has, more than anything. We're within close proximity to a couple of different colleges and stuff, but there's this idea that college students are going to create this bustling, thriving, game store community, and the reality of it is most college students don't have a ton of money.
Right.
So while we have a whole ton of them that come in and play in our events, they don't tend to be the top end of the buyer because, well, they've got student loans and stuff like that they're worried about, and they're trying to eat and stuff. Not to say that, when they get their financial aid checks and different things like that, they don't come in and spend some money on that kind of thing. But for the most part, they're focused. We have University of Rochester, which is one of the top medical schools in the country, and we've got RIT, which is one of the top tech schools in the country. Those people are studying. Not to say that they don't come in and play in our events and stuff, but they're doing a lot of studying in general. So
I'd rather be based near a slacker college.
Yeah, 100%. Give me a slacker college all day. But I mean, I think the weather has helped us out in that Rochester, for being one of the larger cities in New York, actually has very reasonable real estate pricing. So like my commercial rent isn't what my friends in California or Oregon are dealing with. So I think that it more has to do with what your fixed costs are versus what you can actually get away with as far as square footage goes. And the larger you are and the more impressive you are, the better your numbers are. I've got, my friend Dave that runs Dragon's Lair, he's got 3 locations in Texas, and that's about as south as you can possibly get in the country. And his climate is super hot all the time. So I don't think that climate necessarily equals success. I was out in California for Christmas this year. My fiance's family lives out there, and I went on a lunch date with a couple of publishing friends that are out there, and we got to tour some of the stores out in the San Diego area. And I would say it was one of those areas where I was kind of licking my chops. I'm like, okay, I'm doing some calculations, and I'm going, there's this many million people out here, and yeah, I realize that the weather's 72 and beautiful all the time and stuff like that, but gosh, it seems like it's an underserved area out there. Maybe I wouldn't mind doing like a West Coast store or something. That's very different than what I'm dealing with the East Coast, but maybe I could do that from, I don't know, November to March.
Michael wants to know, what's the rate of store returns due to missing components, and what's your process? The whole component thing obviously has come to the forefront with Asmodee's recent change in policies. But what do you do with that if someone brings a game back and says, it's missing whatever?
I mean, if it's something that I've got a couple of copies on the shelf, we'll just do a straight return in exchange, and then our process, our old process used to be, if you as a customer reach out to the publisher, they're going to get back to you quicker than what it's going to take me to get through to the publisher to get that back to me. And we can just skip that process. You can grab a meeple from, Ravensburger or whoever didn't put the part in the box, and if you contact them, I don't know any publishing companies that don't have a place to kind of reach out to for a parts replacement. So the majority of the time what we'll say to them is we'll just encourage them to reach out to the publisher and have them do that themselves. Now, that said, we've got a huge used game section. So at this point, we've just been doing, since we started the used game section, we started doing exchanges just that way. We'll wait for the publisher to send us the part. We'll put the used game on the shelf with the part included in the box, and the customer will go out the door with the shrink wrap copy or whatever. So yeah, I know it got to be a big deal, and Asmodee, I had a conversation with Asmodee at New York Toy Fair after the fact, and they said, hey, it seems like we made some missteps here. And I said, hey, you guys have my phone number. You could have called me before you had this conversation, decided to push this out, and we could have had a little back and forth, and you could have saved yourself a lot of headache, because I think your messaging here just sucks. So, we kind of went back and forth on that, but I don't know. For us, it was never that huge of a deal. It isn't like for every 20 games that go out the door, one of them comes back or anything like that. And we sell some accessory components at the store as well too. So sometimes it depends on how dynamic the thing is. If it's a card that is super, super critical versus just a wooden hut or something like that, then it's a much different thing. Now, you've got completionists and people that really want to make sure that their stuff is pristine and stuff. And we sold broken token stuff, and we sell some of the different meeple things that they have in the marketplace. So sometimes we'll have one of those kits to be able to sell or something like that that'll take care of that. But for the most part, it's almost a non-issue, really.
Well, on that subject, Fred asked the question: do you buy secondhand games?
Yep.
And so, how does the process for that work? So I come in and I say, I'm tired of playing this Dominion copy.
Sure.
How does that work?
Sure. So it comes in, and usually we're typically going to give you 20 to 25% of what MSRP is in store credit based on what the game is and if we've got extra used copies. So it's not a giant amount of money, but what we find is as people's game closets got more and more and more robust and filled, they just didn't want to deal with whether it's a BGG swap or playing around with eBay or dealing with buying and selling and that kind of stuff. There's just a convenience factor to it. So people will come in with games that they just, we'll get Mark and Mindy a trivia sometimes and, all this weird ancillary stuff. So we'll just go through and we'll do an evaluation on the spot. We'll let you know what the price is for each of the different games, take what you want, store credit in hand, and off you go.
Do you find that, is there like a market for people buying those, or is it harder to move used games?
So it depends on the game. It's like everything else. What's interesting about that section of the store is very quickly my ingrained gamers that were familiar with that department realized that if they wanted to buy something, they needed to buy it immediately. Because, again, so we go back to UVP. Everything that I sell in my store you can find for 20 to 30% off cheaper on Amazon, and it can be in your store, in your house in 2 days, in the normal world, the pre-corona world. So how do I try to compete with an entity like that? Well, if I've got used games in my store and I'm pricing them at 50% off or 50% of MSRP to begin with, they're slightly used and some of them have never been played before. All of a sudden now and I've bought them for half of that. Now I can fit it within my business model margins and I can make the money that I need to. I can sell it to a customer that's price conscious. And then on top of that, the games that I have in my used section are typically not games that are readily available in distribution, or they're available online either, because games go out of print. You can't find games. So when somebody comes in, we had a copy of Star Wars Carcassonne that came in randomly the other day. Well, that's not something that you can get, and that was somebody that specifically bought that and probably bought it from Europe or did something like that. Right. So we get Hero Quest will come in, and some real gems will come in, and we'll price them based on what that is, and we give, we factor that when we're talking about buying them too. We've had plenty of copies of HeroScape and all that stuff. Different things come in, so there's gems. Now we don't go through the process of making sure that every part and every piece is there. We price those games pretty aggressively. We buy them pretty aggressively. So occasionally what will happen is people will come in and say, well, did you check to make sure that all the parts are there? Nope, absolutely not. Okay, well, how does that work? Well, you can feel free to take your time and go through and take a look at all the prices, all the parts and stuff like that. But if I did that process, I would have to price these higher because I'd have to pay employees to go through and to verify the quantity and so on and so forth. So they'd be more costly. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we sold a copy of Smash Up to somebody for $20. When they opened that copy of Smash Up, it had 6 expansions in it. Well, happy days. You get
that is like a gold mine.
You got a bunch of expansions and stuff, and that'll happen. We've got people that are collectors that'll have, whether they bought something off of, there's a BGG promo or there's an extra promo or something like that, and that's just thrown in the box. Now, we didn't put it in any pricing. The customer that sold it to us didn't care about that part of it. They didn't do anything special or spectacular for that, so everybody walked away pretty good. Now, I have had times when historical gamers have come in with some real old GMT stuff, and we've just had no idea what to put on it for a price. And those things, well, we sell some of those used. A lot of times we'll go to eBay or something like that to try to sell those. And there's been times when we've made phone calls to customers and said, look, Tony, we sold this game for $400. I only gave you 20 in store credit because we had no idea what the market value of it is. You've got another $60 in store credit here the next time you're in, just so you know. And they don't care. They leave. They're happy to get the games out of the closet. Whoever their significant others doesn't care. It's less games coming in the house the next time through. And the transaction was fine, but at the end of the day, there's a moral contract that we have with our customers that just says, look, if we put that out in the open market and we get a lot more for it than what we thought, then I'm not just going to take that. Like, you're my community, so come back in. I've got your extra money. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, you know what, that's great. I appreciate it. And some of them are just like, it doesn't matter to me. I got what I wanted to get from it. Yeah, but for us to be square with you, we're happier to do it this way. So Use is a really, really critical, important part of our business that wasn't 4 years ago or 5 years ago.
Unfortunately, that is the amount of time that we have here, folks. Travis, I really appreciate you coming on. Folks, if you want to check out his store, it's at millenniumgames.com. And you can see if you're in Rochester and the roads are open, go check out the store. It's full of games still, I'm assuming. And
yeah.
And I would imagine once everything opens up, we're going to see a whole wave of new games show up at some point this fall.
For
so
sure.
Looking forward to that. But once again, thanks for coming on, and really interesting questions. If you're ever thinking about running a game store, I highly recommend you hunting down Travis on Facebook and following him, because he gives out a lot of good advice there. So thank you again, sir.
Thanks so much.